Welcome back to 8 Metal Strings. I am finished moving, set up in my new place, my little studio, and I am excited to get back into making videos for you guys about all the things we can do and learn on the 8-string guitar. Today's video is the third installment of our little mini selective picking series, and in it we're going to go over how to add the pluck into the whole selective picking technique. This gives us the ability to hit a note 3 different ways, and each way produces its own timbre or different kind of tonal quality to the pitch. In my opinion, this is kind of the coolest thing about selective picking and why it's worth practicing a little bit. It can lead to some super interesting ideas if you're into writing riffs on your guitar, as now no longer do you just have to think about what notes and what rhythm are you going to play, but you can also think about how you're going to play that note. Are you going to pick that note? Are you going to hammer it? Are you going to pluck it? Is it going to be an open string? Is it going to be fretted? What string is it going to be fretted on? All these sorts of things kind of add to the dimension and interest of the riffs you write. Just like always, you can find the video PDF for the exercises I'm going to cover today down in the description below. It's also on my Buy Me a Coffee page, and that is free for you just to download and use so you can follow along or work on this stuff at home. So with all of that said, let's check out how the hybrid picking style pluck can contribute to our selective picking technique to open up some new doors. So when you hear anybody talking about doing a pluck to attack a string, they're talking about using one of the free fingers to hit the string in an upward motion while still holding onto the pick. So that can be done muted or unmuted. For most of our stuff today, I'm going to be doing muting just to control kind of the timbre and the resonance of the guitar. But basically it looks like this. That would be my middle finger. That one is probably most comfortable for me. But you could also use your ring finger. It's just at a bit more of an awkward angle unless you take off the mute. So essentially it's finger picking, but we are still holding onto the pick while we're doing it. So a good question to ask before we set out to learn any new technique and spend a bunch of time practicing it is, why are we learning it and what benefits does it give us? Well, for the pluck, when we're selective picking, it actually allows us to do large intervallic structures or string skipping a lot easier and a lot quicker than if we were just to use our pick. So if we were just to use our pick and we wanted to do some extreme string crossing while doing some selective picking, it would be a lot of motion with the right hand to jump around on the strings. So you can see how much traveling my hand actually has to do there. Let's replace that first pick with a pluck. So much less movement is required of this hand, and we can go a lot faster. So this first exercise works on this a little bit and just uses the pluck in place of the pick for one of the notes so that we can avoid using so much motion in the right hand. Some variations you can do on this exercise, if you're so inclined, is you can ascend the chord structure. Or you can try adding an extra pick at the end of every group of notes to create groups of 7. Or to your heart's content, you can really explore in any other way that you want, maybe adding other notes to the chord or changing up the chords themselves. The nice thing about this technique is there's not too much to consider technique-wise beyond just kind of getting the coordination down. But one thing I can point out to you all is that you want to be watching this, the first joint of the middle finger or ring finger, depending on which one you're using to do your plucking. Now you don't want it to be too tight and too rigid or have the angle too extreme, because what that will do is kind of create this horizontal scratching sound of the string as you're trying to pluck it. So if you can have this just a little bit flexible, a little bit loose, and maybe lighten up on the angle of that finger, you get a bit more of a pluck rather than a scratch. The only other thing I'm going to point out is that it is essential to still think about how you're muting the strings with your right hand. It's always a challenge with this many strings to keep them under control and to keep that sympathetic resonance down. So just pay attention and keep your ears open for any strings that might be ringing out while you're practicing these exercises, and just make sure to dampen them out. That is, if you're working with muted sounds. If you're just doing open strings, you're going to have to be careful and use your left hand to try to mute as much as you can. That shouldn't be ringing. So let's move on to one of the cooler and more popular things that you're going to find when you look up people doing selective picking, and that is to add open strings into our riffs using the pluck. Previously, it was very difficult to add these open strings, specifically string 1, 2, 3, and 4, because it would be a big jump, like we mentioned earlier, to go between the low strings and the high strings. In general, what adding these open strings does is it creates a very cool sonic effect in which we can double pitches. And again, like I talked about a little bit in the beginning, it gives us different timbres for the same pitch, which kind of messes with the listener's ear and making it sound like there's way more notes than there actually are. So for example, let's hit the open B string with our middle finger and pluck it. And then we're going to hammer on fret 9 on string 4 to get that B. And then we're going to pick that same note twice. So it gets this kind of cool effect where we're only playing one note, but it sounds like many more. It's kind of akin to alternate fingering on saxophones, which is a technique that I really love. So the first exercise there just plays a little bit with that doubling. It doubles the open E string at times, the open B string, and also the open G string. It's also a good way to kind of learn your fretboard, finding all these notes that are the same as your open strings. For technique, what you're going to want to focus on here is all volume matching. Make sure that your muted strings, your hammer-ons, your picks, your pluck notes are all roughly the same volume so that none of them stand out and kind of give away that illusion that we're just hitting the same note different ways. So try to avoid or and instead make a more homogeneous tone between those notes. Might be a little tricky at first because guitar players tend not to have to listen for volume matching within their own instrument because the strings are already so similar, but it's a good thing to work on. One of the little upsides and perks to using these open strings is that it gives the left hand a little bit more time to adjust and change positions compared to as if it had to always fret notes and always have a finger down. So when you're working on this, if you're having any trouble, keep in mind that whenever you pluck that open string, it gives you a split second to readjust that left hand to where you want it to be. Another very cool use of open strings is to create pedal tones. So that means having a consistent tone under a changing set of harmonies or other notes. So that can be seen here in this next exercise where I am continuously pedaling the G string, and the D string is actually quite present as well for the first two chords. Some variations on this last exercise you can do if you're inclined is to unmute the strings. Or you can also try letting things ring. So lastly, we're going to move on to using these open strings to do actual hammer-ons. Like not hammer-ons from nowhere, but actual, real hammer-ons, where we hit a string and then we do the hammer-on. This will give us the opportunity to do some very cool large intervallic leaps on the same string. Which means we get that hammer-on from nowhere or hammer-on sound and the timbre that it produces, but we're staying on the same string. So it kind of, again, messes with the ears a little bit in that if all we're hearing are these hammer-ons flying across strings when we're doing our selective picking, now just that homogeneous sound of staying on one string adds another little wrench into it. It changes up that total confusion by adding some like similarity within it all. So this last exercise is almost like a bit of a cadenza. You can think of it as B7 if you like resolving just a B major. And it uses these open strings to do a hammer-on to start each group of notes. So that's about it for what I have to show you about this technique. Like I said earlier, it's not that much to really learn, especially if you've done some finger picking or hybrid picking in the past. It will take a little bit of time to get used to that hand position muting the strings to enable us to pluck the strings we want to, and to get that first knuckle in a position and kind of relaxed enough that we can avoid that fingernail scraping sound across the strings. But beyond that, it's just going to be working on more coordination between the left and right hand and getting those rhythms nice and tight. So make sure you're always practicing with a metronome when you're working on these exercises. I definitely encourage everyone to try writing riffs of their own using these techniques, especially using that doubling idea, where you hit open strings and then double those with a fretted version of the note in order just to mess with the ear and create the illusion of a wall of pitches. All these little subtle timbre differences that you create with all the different ways now that we can play a note is really cool, and it has a very cool effect in a larger context of a song or band piece. If you're looking for some inspiration or just want to see how this comes across, check out some Animals as Leader stuff. Tosin uses the selective picking idea a ton, and arguably he's the one who has popularized it for kind of the modern generation of guitarists. I have a couple of video breakdowns of some selective picking riffs already, so you can check out the one from Monomyth if you like. That one kind of includes everything and is quite a challenge, so if you're up for it, I'll link it in the description below, or you can check out the little eye in the corner here. Or if you want, Inner Assassins uses a lot of just hammer-ons and picking if you want to work on that rhythmic coordination. And that's going to be it for me today. I hope I could show you something cool and new to work on and practice, hopefully that you can incorporate into your playing after some time working on it. As always, wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and as always, happy practicing.